Right, hello everyone. Today we're looking at Nazi racial and religious policy with the goal of being able to examine the main policies aimed at Jews in Nazi Germany. We'll start off by taking a look at the image on the right-hand side and starting to think about what is happening and why this is taking place. This may be an image you have seen before, it may be totally new to you, but we will get back to this image shortly as the lesson goes on. But in the backs of our minds, let's just start to think, what is happening here and why might this be happening? Now, everything that we know, we have learned at some point or another. Things like tying shoes, eating solid food, riding the bus, being polite, caring for others. These are all things that we have either been taught or we have learned to do. Now, hate can also be learned. And anti Semitism, which is the hatred and mistreatment of Jewish people, has existed for nearly 2,000 years. Now, young Germans actually learn to be anti Semitic both from their parents as well as from their teachers in school. And a lot of people ask, why were Jews hated so much? Well, even since the ancient Romans, anti Semitism has been quite popular. Historically, Jews have been blamed for plagues, famines, financial problems. They were stereotyped as giving loans at very high interest, particularly in Germany during the Great Depression between 1929 and 1933. Hitler wanted to create a very pure race that rid Germany of any kind of Jewish heritage. And many Germans believed that Jews were what we call the Untermensch, which is German for the subhumans, but not many people could explain why they believed this. So this is kind of like knowing you don't like snails, but not being able to explain why, especially if you haven't even tried eating them before. So we did talk about how we'll come back to the image from our starter. And if we just look down on the right-hand side, we can see it here. The Nazis developed a system, shall we call it, of being able to identify people, whether they were German or Jewish, based on measurements on their heads and faces. And this had different theories like the length of the bridge of a nose, the distance between the ear and the eyes, the level in which the ear sits versus the eye, different characteristics that we know isn't scientific by any means. The Nazis were trying to apply an element of science too, to try and be able to identify physically who was Jewish and who was not. Let's just say the Nuremberg laws, it really only works if the people in your country support it. And if you want to eliminate all Jews from schools, again, you need the public support to be able to do these things. So stage one actually starts off by normalizing hatred. Hitler, he glorified Aryan Germans with this idea of blonde hair and blue eyes. And I can see many of you sat at home thinking, hang on a second, Hitler didn't have blonde hair or blue eyes. Trust me, we'll get to it in a moment. Propaganda campaigns targeted the stereotypical Jewish appearance, the long nose, dark hair, small eyes. Again, just trying to point out those physical characteristics to help regular Germans identify who was German and who was not. And anti Semitism in school. The bullying of Jews was encouraged. Jews were put in separate classrooms or even sat to the back of classrooms where they were integrated with German children. And unfair assessment were all encouraged by the public school system. Now, this is where young Germans started to learn that they were different and they were superior to Jews. This is quite a famous picture. This actually says the Jews are inferior, the Jews are an enemy of Germany. And this is a Jewish boy here with another Jewish boy to his left, with a German boy reading this to the class. This is an incredibly humiliating experience for these two young boys. This picture was taken not long before they were eventually excluded from that school. Stage two is the restriction of civil liberties. A boycott of all Jewish shops was enforced in 1933, where Germans were told, don't go to shops owned by Jews, and this was reinforced by having members of the SA stand outside of Jewish shops to scare away potential shoppers. The 1935 Nuremberg laws, they were really important because they stripped German Jews of their citizenship. They removed them from jobs in public office. They could no longer inherit or own any land, and they were banned from going to public places such as parks. Stage three was the public participation of violence. And coming back to Kristallnacht, this translates into English as the Night of Broken Glass. This is where the Nazis encouraged regular Germans to participate willingly in violence. The instructions were go out tonight on the 8th of November 1938 and just start to smash in the windows of any Jewish shops you know. Feel free to take anything from inside, Jewish synagogues, Jewish homes. Now's the time to vandalize and to destroy their property. This was aimed at terrifying the Jewish population to get them to leave Germany. We'll talk later on about concentration camps and the role that they served, and Hitler's opinion on deportation versus extermination. Acts of shaming and violence in public, they often went unchallenged and sometimes were even encouraged by police. So we have a Jewish man here. He's wearing a sign around his neck that says, I am a race mixer. So he's been accused of having a relationship with a German woman. And all Jews have to have registration cards and wear a yellow Star of David to identify themselves in public. And we can see that even children as young as a year old or 2 years old had to follow these rules by wearing that form of identification. Stage four is the removal from society. Ghettos were set up, with the worst of them being in Warsaw, Poland. People were originally held in by barbed wire fences. Sometimes these fences were electrified, sometimes they weren't. But initially, the ghettos were quite rudimentary in their design. There was no electricity, no running water, there was very little food, and a lot of people died of starvation or disease within these ghettos. As time went on, the Nazis realized the ghettos are going to be a more permanent fixture of their regime, and they decided to build large walls to surround the ghettos. And ironically, these walls were actually built by the inmates themselves. And escaping was incredibly dangerous, and reprisals were common. So within a ghetto, people often wanted to leave, but they knew it wasn't in their best interest to do so. The Nazis had a deal with the inmates. Essentially, we'll leave you alone inside the ghetto so long as you don't try to escape. And if you do, the amount that get out, we will kill that amount of individuals within the ghetto. So this was another incentive for people to stay inside and not to leave, because they knew if they escaped themselves, someone inside the ghetto would be put to death for their actions. And the last is stage five. This is the systematic extermination. Now, between 6 to 10 million Jews were murdered in camps across German occupied Europe. We don't know the exact figure because the records were often destroyed by the Nazis. Prisoners in good health, they were put to work immediately, while those who were elderly or unable to work, they were put to death. An escape was nearly impossible. Many camps were in very rural areas. Inmates had their regular clothes taken away and they were given prisoner uniforms, so they'd be easily identifiable by any of the surrounding villages if they were able to get out. Now it's time for our bonus facts. Hitler wasn't even German. Hitler was from an area in Austria, not far from the German border, so he did grow up speaking German, and he grew up believing that his country should unite with Germany once again. So even though by birth he was Austrian, Hitler grew up believing that he was a German. And on the whole blonde hair, blue eyes thing, it's pretty obvious that Hitler himself had dark hair and dark eyes. The reason why he glorified this Aryan blonde hair, blue eye image was to do with the historic roots of the Germanic people. Now, people who are from Germany historically came from areas of Denmark, Sweden, Norway, those regions in Finland. And when they moved into Europe, they brought along with them their ethnic appearance, which was to have lighter colored hair and lighter colored eyes. So Hitler believed that if you were pure in your German heritage, your family typically came from Norway, Sweden, Finland, or Denmark, and therefore that you would have lighter hair and lighter eyes. It didn't mean you had to have blonde hair or blue eyes to be a Nazi or to be a good German. All you had to do was prove that within your family, you didn't have any Jewish relatives up until your great grandparents. Another fact is not all Germans were anti-Semitic and not all Germans were Nazis. There were plenty of German people who risked their lives and put themselves into harm's way to try and help their Jewish friends and neighbors and colleagues by hiding them within their homes. This made a lot of people get creative by building trapdoors and false walls and allowing people to live inside of attics or inside of loft space in their homes. And the last one, Hitler didn't want to exterminate Jews at first. Hitler was a very strong believer in the deportation element of the Holocaust. Hitler decided it was far more cost effective to get Jewish people to leave on their own and provide that land, space, and jobs for German people. Hitler decided that in 1938, Kristallnacht could be used as a really strong tool to get Jewish people to leave Germany on their own simply out of fear, and those who didn't leave would be dealt with in the final solution in the coming years. This is a picture of Auschwitz concentration camp. A lot of the huts were actually destroyed by the Nazis before they left, but you can just see the scale of how many different huts there were. Each hut could house upwards of 100 to 300 individuals. This plan wasn't put into place until 1940, and it wasn't actually Hitler's idea to build the concentration camps. This was the idea of one of his very close advisors, Heinrich Himmler. Right, that is our lesson today on Nazi racial and religious policy. Please check Show My Homework to see if there's a quiz available for you to complete and complete any of the other tasks set by your teacher.